Hello and welcome to episode 372 of the Money to the Masses podcast with your resident expert, as always, Damien Fay and me, Andy Leaks. Damien, welcome back. We're here for another week.
Yes, and something quite exciting happened this week. You actually kind of alluded to it at the end of last week's show that we were going to reach a milestone with our Instagram, and we actually crossed over the 10,000 follower mark, which was very exciting, and I thank everybody for their support. I know there'll be a number of podcast listeners who follow us on Instagram as well, and it's well worth following us on Instagram because we put out different content than what we do on the podcast, because obviously it's a very different medium. So make sure if you haven't already followed us on our social channels, then do so. And on Instagram, I'm often giving away mugs as well, and this week, to celebrate the 10,000 follower mark, we actually gave away a £50 Amazon voucher. So do head over to Instagram and search for Money to the Masses and you'll find our account. And on that note of socials, our YouTube channel is obviously growing strongly as well. We're putting out lots of content on there. And if you recall, I recently changed the midweek market show, and it's now a monthly investing show, and I might do ad hoc episodes every now and then. And I just want to read out this latest review for the podcast because it does go out as a podcast show as well on this feed. And the review is from 110 Andy G, and it says, outstanding, and it's 5 stars. Love the new format, much more reflective to have monthly, not weekly podcasts. Thinking of cancelling my Investors Chronicle subscription for this reason, which is a lovely review. And if that was you, then do get in touch because I am feeling generous with the mugs at the moment. So email lauren@moneytothemasses.com to claim that as your review, and then tell us your address and we will send you out a Money to the Masses mug. And before I tell you what's on the show, Andy, I just wanted to highlight to anybody out there who has a savings account. We mentioned it on Instagram, but Marcus, the savings account from Goldman Sachs, has previously been one of the best buys in terms of easy access savings accounts. Well, they've increased their rate on their account for existing customers. So new customers get this new rate of 1.3%, but existing customers, their rate is 0.25% below that. And to receive the same rate as a new customer, if you're an existing customer, then you have to go and claim that by going onto the app. So go and look at the Money to the Masses website because we tell you how to do that. But it's just an FYI out there because I know there's a lot of people out there who did open a Marcus account because there was much fanfare about the company about a year ago when they had some really good rates.
Okay, so let's get on with this week's podcast then. And Damien, what have we got coming up on this week's show?
So I've often done pieces about pensions, about how much you should save for retirement, tips on how to boost your pension pot. And this week I'm going to do something slightly different actually, and I'm going to focus on retirement spending. So we often talk about the amount of money you need for retirement, but there's not much research into the spending patterns of people who are in retirement, because there is an assumption that your spending drops very quickly when you go into retirement. And actually the reality is being found is very different. So I'm going to cover that piece of research. It's going to be particularly relevant to everybody because as we're saving for retirement, we need to understand the kind of money that we need. I'm also going to do a tip on how to beat the interest rate hikes that we're seeing from the Bank of England. We touched upon coming off a fixed rate deal in the future on podcast 367, but there's another tip that I didn't include then that I want to focus on and draw people's attention to. And finally, Andy, you're doing the last piece to do with the rising cost of our grocery shopping bills.
Yeah, that's right. There was some research this week that talked about inflation and actually the real rise in the costs of groceries. So I've pulled together some of the best apps that we can be using when we do our grocery shopping to bring those costs down so that we can all save a bit of money on our shopping bills.
Great. I look forward to that piece. As you know, I love an app to help me achieve something. So I'm going to kick straight on with the pension piece. Now, as I mentioned in the past, I've done a lot of pieces on pensions, teaching people how to start a pension, how much they need for retirement, how to boost their pension pot. And in fact, podcast 335 was an episode that was incredibly popular where I explained how you could get an equivalent of a £30,000 a year retirement income by paying as little as £80 a month. And in that piece, it was quite a clever bit of financial planning, if I do say so myself, where you managed to get the size of the pot you needed down by taking a variety of actions. And it's worth going back and listening to that show, because ultimately you came out the other end with a plan that you could put in place that would produce a sustainable income in retirement. Now, one of the things that is assumed when you get into retirement, as you get older, you start to spend less money, which seems a reasonable assumption because people become less mobile and then maybe their choices change. But there isn't actually much evidence out there for the changes in people's spending habits as they go through retirement. So my base case has always been, well, plan to have a retirement income that is sustainable, and hopefully the Brucey bonus will be, as you get older, then your retirement income spending will start to drop, which means that hopefully your money will go even further as well. So it's almost like a Brucey bonus. But interestingly, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, known as the IFS for short, has actually looked into the spending patterns of retirees between 2006 and 2018 to analyse how do they spend their money and how does that change throughout your retirement. And there are a bunch of findings that I just want to talk through because they are very insightful when it comes to planning for our own future retirement. Now, first of all, they found broadly that the total household spending per person does start to increase slightly up to the age of 80. And it's broadly about 1% a year after inflation that your spending goes up. Then from age 80, it starts to fall, which is broadly by about 1% after inflation a year. Now, what it shows is the desire and need to spend doesn't appear to fall as you age. And when they looked at those numbers, there were certain factors that were driving it. Now, interestingly, if you were from a lower income household, then your spending fell ever so slightly in your 60s and then remained flat thereafter. Interestingly, for the average person, the reason why their spending increased slightly year on year after the age of retirement in their 60s up to age 80 was mostly driven by spending on leisure activities and principally on holidays. So that seems to hold true even anecdotally of people I know that retire. So once they hit retirement, they start to do a lot more traveling or, like you say, going on some kind of holiday, which increases their spending in those early years of retirement. But there is a shift that starts to happen as you go through retirement. The amount you spend on things like holidays and motoring, so getting out and about, driving places, does start to dwindle and it does start to fall, which is one of the reasons that you get the fall beyond age 80 because people spend less on holidays. But the other thing is the dynamic, what you spend your money on starts to change and you actually start to spend more money on what are known as household services, so things like cleaners, gardeners, as you get beyond age 75. So once you get beyond the ages of 75, you start spending more on those sorts of things. And that, again, does kind of make sense if you think about anecdotally people that you probably know, they aren't able to do the gardening or their own housekeeping themselves, and therefore they might get somebody in to help them. So that starts to pivot and change the type of things you spend on. So if you're thinking about your retirement, then you would have to factor in that idea that you might spend more on those sorts of services. Interestingly, the amount you spend per person on bills from ages 75 to 85 starts to increase quite considerably. And that is because it reflects a loss of income from a partner dying. So when you think about your retirement income, often there'll be two people in a partnership and they may have their own pensions, they may have their state pension, but as one of them dies, therefore that income isn't necessarily replaced. There'll be a drop in income, and therefore the bills that you spend, maybe housing, those things I mentioned like household services, don't fall in value. You're still paying the same amount, but it's coming from a lower income. So your amount of your spending that goes on those things, percentage wise, actually starts to go up on an individual basis. The research also showed there is a change in trend in how people spend their money in retirement. And by that I mean that people who are retiring now are spending more money percentage wise of their income on things like holidays, and they're spending less on things like in-house food. So presumably they're doing things like possibly eating out more. Then that is in comparison to people who say have retired previously in this study. So don't forget, this study covered a period going back almost 20 years. So if you take that idea, then if you extrapolate that into the future and that trend does in fact continue, what it could mean is that people who retire in the future, so us and people younger than us, could at the point of retirement be spending even more on holidays and things like leisure activities, eating out, whatever it may be, less on that stuff in the home. And then as they hit retirement, because they're spending more on that kind of stuff, then possibly the rate at which they're spending increases in those early years of retirement would actually be higher than that 1% after inflation that I talked about earlier, actually faster than that. So maybe we need to start factoring that into our planning. Now, one other thing that came to light in this piece of research is that while spending increased during retirement, typically up to the age of 80, incomes also increased, but increased faster than that spending. And that's because more people are qualifying for the state pension now, and there are obviously more people with private pensions, and particularly in the case of the state pension, it increases in line with inflation, and often more so than the official rate of inflation. And of course, there are more people claiming things like disability benefits, and there are more people who are entitled to survivor pension benefits as well. So that means that their income is actually increasing in their retirement. And so we're seeing signs that savings rates and the amount of people in retirement who are able to put money aside has actually increased as well. So that is a general positive to this study. So taking all that in the round, what is the practical application of the research? Now, the message really is that broadly speaking, you should fund for a retirement where you have a flat retirement income throughout your life, ignoring inflation. So that fits quite nicely to what I mentioned at the beginning, because that has been generally my rule of thumb that I've used in the past. And the fact that your retirement spending may reduce over time would be a Brucey bonus. Well, the research shows, in fact, your spending will go up likely at the start of your retirement. And when you get to 80, if you're lucky enough, it will start to, on average, fall. Now, these are averages. It's not the same for everybody. There are nuances, of course. But even in that scenario, planning for a flat retirement income still makes sense. And part of the reason for that is, even with that example I gave on podcast 335, because there is part of your retirement income, like the state pension, that is inflation protected as well. So that is going to go up. But the message is plan for that flat retirement income, and hopefully you should be okay, assuming that it is a sustainable level. And by that I mean that your pension pot can produce that year on year. And a good guide for that level are our current annuity rates, which is around about 4.4% at retirement age of about 65. So if you could produce a retirement income from 4.4% or something like that of your pension pot, then it's likely to be sustainable over the long run and hopefully give you a bit of inflation protection along the way.
Okay, so let's move on to the next piece then. Now, we've all no doubt heard the news. Interest rates have risen again this week. And so, Damien, you've taken another look, a slightly different look at mortgages, and you've got something for the pod.
Yeah, so on podcast 367, which again was very well received, because I was talking about the idea that you may be on a fixed rate deal, for example, and you may be thinking, I'm going to come off my deal at some point in the near future, maybe next year. And I was talking about preparing for coming off a fixed rate deal. And that was particularly aimed at people where their deal may be ending in the future, possibly next year. And after listening back to that show, I realised there was a tip that I should have given on there that I hadn't. And I happened to be talking to somebody this week and mentioned to them that you do know you could do X. Well, this part of the podcast is where I talk about what X is. So in that show, I mentioned that people could get in contact with their existing lender, and they could do it up to 6 months before and see if they can get moved on to a better rate. And sometimes you may be lucky enough to be able to get on an alternative rate from your existing lender. But what about if you want to shop around and go somewhere else? And at the moment, the Bank of England has raised interest rates 5 times in a row. That is unprecedented, actually. And the market is pricing in that they might raise interest rates again in August and September. Now, you might be thinking, oh, good, that means they're not doing it in July. They're not doing it in July because there isn't a meeting in July. So August and September, the next ones we're looking at. Of course, if you're due to come off your fixed deal at the end of this year, then you may be sitting there thinking, well, what's going to happen when we get there? The rates are going to be way higher than they are now. To give you an example, if we go back to just October, so that's about 8 months ago or so, then interest rates on mortgage deals are about twice what they were then. So we've had a big ratchet up in the rate that people are paying on their mortgages when they're fixing now. The good news is there is something you can do now to lock into a better rate on your mortgage. So if you go and speak to a mortgage advisor, it is possible to secure a new deal which will begin when your old one finishes. So immediately when you come off your current deal, you can have a deal in place, a fixed deal that starts immediately. And typically that can be done 3 months in advance of the end of your deal, but in some cases it can be 6 months. And the positive of doing that is that the rate you could get now could be better than they will be when you get to the end of your existing deal. And if you lock in now, then that will be in place. Yes, you are going to have to pay a fee now for doing that, but there is a good chance that the rate you get now will be better than if you waited until the end of the year, because mortgage rates are being pulled all the time in reaction to what the Bank of England is doing. And of course, on top of that, don't forget that the assessment for your deal will occur now as well. So affordability checks will be occurring at this point, which could be potentially a positive for you. And on that note about affordability, if people have seen a setback in their financial situation, then a product transfer, like I mentioned in episode 367, might suit them more, because you can often arrange a product transfer without a proof of income, which you can't do with a remortgage. So the message is, if you are coming off your deal towards the end of this year, then you should really get in touch with a mortgage advisor. If you don't know one, then you could use somebody like Habito or go to Vouched For. We'll put a link in the show notes. In fact, you can get a free mortgage review via Money to the Masses with Vouched For. We'll put a link in the show notes and on the article that relates to this particular episode on the Money to the Masses website. So by taking action today, putting the wheels in motion, you could potentially save yourself thousands of pounds in the coming years.
Okay, good stuff. So let's move on to the final piece of the podcast then. And I'm going to be covering 5 of the best apps that you can use to help save money on your food bills. Now, this comes on the back of a recent report that said food price rises in the UK could hit 15% this summer, with fruit, vegetables, dairy, cereals and meat being the hardest hit. So I went and did a bit of research. Now, we've covered a couple of these apps before on the podcast, but it's a timely reminder that there are apps out there that can help you to save a decent amount on your food bill, and I've actually supplemented those that we've mentioned before with a few extra that I've found. Some of them are really good and you should definitely give them a go. So let's make a start then. The first app that everyone should go and download today is an app called Too Good To Go. Now, this is an app that connects the retailers, the supermarkets, with consumers, you and I, who download the app in an effort to fight food waste. Now, you've no doubt seen the programs before, or you've probably even witnessed the backs of supermarkets with the piles and piles of food that they throw away each day that they can't sell because it's gone beyond the best before or the sell by dates, which is criminal. And Too Good To Go is an app that helps to fight that food waste because it enables supermarkets to list food that has short shelf life, and end users can pick up some real bargains. Now, the items do normally have a short shelf life, so you're going to have to accept that if you're going on the app and looking to purchase some of these items, but it's absolutely perfect for those that are running low on a few items or just like to pick up a bit of a bargain, really. It reminds me of the program Ready Steady Cook, where you just go along and pick up a random bunch of items for £5. This is really no different. What you'll do is you can go onto the app and you can search by location, and you'll be able to see a number of listings, hopefully from a few supermarkets in your area, where you can go along and pick up these bargain boxes. I've recently done it myself. There was a Morrison's down the road from me that was offering a mystery bag of goods that was worth well over £10, and they were listing it for around about £3.50. And I went along and there were things in there like carrots and broccoli. There was also some mini Scotch eggs in there. There was also some really nice ham and some milk and some bread. So it was well worth a £3, because what I ended up doing is making sandwiches for all of us as a family out of the ham and the bread, and I think there was tomatoes in there as well in that particular bag. So I mean, even just for that, the fact that 4 of us the following day had lunch, if you go and get a meal deal from your local supermarket, you're looking at least £3 to £3.50 per person. So it's well worth the money, and it's not only fighting food waste, it is of course, going to save people money if they do it. So that's Too Good To Go. Get that app, have a little look at it. The next one is actually very similar to Too Good To Go. It's an app called Olio. Now, Olio, OLIO, is an app that also helps to fight food waste, but rather than retailers listing the food for discount prices, the Olio users themselves list food that is running towards the end of its sell-by date, or that can't be used, or was bought in error, or sometimes it's even home-baked stuff that people, just want to give to the world because they made too much, for example. So it's a great app that people can download and either give away some of their spare food or pick up some food for free. So I'd say this app is perfect for those, again, who are feeling guilty about throwing away their own food and want it to go to good use, but also for perhaps low-income families that rely on other charitable ventures like food banks, for example. This is another avenue for those to be able to pick up food, not just low price, free food. So that's great. The next one is supermarket comparison tools. Now, the one I put in the article is one from Latest Deals. So you can search that on your app store. And it's an app that actually looks at deals for everything, not just supermarkets, but there's a tool within it, which is a supermarket comparison tool, which is excellent. There's also other supermarket comparison apps. There's one called Trolley, which you could download, which is more specifically a supermarket comparison tool. But you can use these tools to search each individual item that you would normally purchase, let's say on your normal shopping app of choice. Let's say you use Asda, or you use Tesco, or you use Sainsbury's. Rather than just blindly putting the same items in the basket each week, you're not truly knowing the real cost of that across the market. So this supermarket comparison tool just gives you a bit of an insight into the cheapest possible place to buy that particular item. Now, it's going to take you a little while to do this. It will possibly take up to an hour or so to put all of your items through and then list where you can get that item the cheapest. And actually, of course, over time, it will change. One week it might be cheapest at Sainsbury's, the next week it might be Tesco. So you will have to do this regularly. But if you are interested in saving money and actually getting the best value on your food shop each week, then it's something you could do. Of course, you need to be living in an area where it's easy to access different supermarkets. So it's not really for you if you live way out in the sticks and you only have one choice of supermarket, but definitely give it a go. I did it myself. It took me about 20 minutes to run through all of my items, and I saved around £8 on a £60 food bill. Of course, I will have to go to different supermarkets to pick up the items. You've got to factor in perhaps petrol costs and things like that. But over the course of the year, if you do it regularly and you get used to doing it, you get a feel for which items are cheapest where. And if you're passing that supermarket anyway, then why wouldn't you pick up, I don't know, your dishwasher tablets from Asda because you're passing and you know they're generally £1 cheaper than where you go. If you're buying that product once or twice a month, then you're going to save £20 a year on each product over the course of the year, and these things add up. The next one is a rewards and cashback app, and it's called Checkout Smart, and it rewards you with cashback when you buy certain products and brands that are listed within the app. So you will have to kind of wait for those deals to pop up as and when they do, but it's really a no-brainer to have that app on you when you shop, because all you need to do is buy the featured product and ensure that you buy it from the retailer that's listed within the app. And then you simply upload the receipt to the app. The cashback is then credited to your account, usually within a couple of days, and then rewards can be transferred to your PayPal or your preferred bank account as and when you wish. And there's no processing fee on that if you transfer £20 or more. So if you're doing lesser amounts, there is a slight processing fee you need to factor in. But it's essentially free money on stuff you may have wanted to purchase anyway, or perhaps you see in the app that there's an offer on a particular product which you could easily swap out for something that you already buy. Why not get the cashback on it? Because these rewards are real cash. The money does come into your account and it soon builds up over time. My final one is a similar app. It is a cashback app similar to Checkout Smart. It's called Shopmium. That's SHOPMIUM. And again, it issues cashback rewards when certain products are purchased. And again, it issues cashback rewards when you purchase certain items. So you just scan through the app and think, yeah, I was going to buy that anyway, or looking at that, I can easily swap that out for something I want. I'm going to buy it. You then upload the receipt when you purchase that item into the app and the money arrives. Now, actually, Shopmium is slightly better with the way they do cashback, in my opinion. You simply upload the picture of the receipt and the cashback rewards are sent automatically to your chosen bank or PayPal account. account without having to build up a certain amount. And so the money will just drip in little bits and pieces here and there. And actually, I've used this over a period of time myself. And what I do is I've got a separate account that I squirrel that money away into. And then I use that money towards the end of the year when I know my shopping bills are going to be bigger because of Christmas. So every year I get around about 20 or 30 pounds towards my Christmas shop, which, hey, why not? It's free money. So there we go, Damien. There's 5 of my favourite apps to save money on your food bills.
Great. So, as ever, you can find the details that Andy's just spoken about on the website, and we'll include a link in the show notes as usual. So, Andy, I think that's it. We're done for this week, aren't we?
We are indeed. So if you want to get in touch with Damien, you can do so in the usual way. It's damien@moneytothemasses.com. Don't forget, we are on Instagram, YouTube, and all the usual places. And if you leave Money to the Masses a glowing review on your podcast app of choice, let us know about it. We'll potentially read it out on the show, and you could win a Money to the Masses mug. Right, Damien, we're off. Until next time.
Until next time.